Space has always been called silent, but silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything waiting to be heard. Between the red dust of Mars and the quiet light of the sun, something began to stir, a pulse small as a heartbeat, faint as the thought of a dream returning. Astronomers first saw it as interference. Dust, data, noise, a reflection caught in the lens. But when the signal returned exactly 12 minutes later, and again after that, its rhythm became impossible to ignore. The pattern did not belong to chance. It came from a small object gliding through sunlight, an interstellar fragment named 3I Atlas, a visitor from beyond our system. When the sun's light touched its frozen surface, the returning photons carried a subtle difference, a kind of order, not chaos but rhythm, not reflection but intention. Every instrument recorded the same whisper, a resonance too perfect to dismiss. Some scientists called it resonant backscatter. Others quietly called it listening light. Light has memory. Every photon carries the record of its journey through dust, through gravity, through time. But this light seemed to remember differently. The spectrum had shifted just enough to suggest awareness, as if the light had learned the name of what it touched. They measured polarization angles and found them turning gently, as if a mirror millions of kilometers away had adjusted itself to be seen. No known field explained it. The reflection had geometry. When the data was plotted, the points curved into a spiral, the same golden ratio that shapes galaxies, shells, hurricanes, and the DNA of life. The numbers spoke the language of pattern, not noise. For a moment, the scientists stopped arguing. They simply looked. It is rare in any age for humans to fall silent before evidence of something they cannot quantify. Coincidence, perhaps, but coincidence has always been the handwriting of the cosmos, a delicate reminder that order can appear where we least expect it. If every photon carries memory, then perhaps memory itself seeks resonance. Perhaps light is not energy in motion, but awareness in transit learning as it travels, returning home with stories hidden in its wavelength. 3I Atlas drifted slowly, its surface glinting blue like a frozen note waiting to be played. The sun burned on constant unblinking. And yet between them, a dialogue unfolded, subtle, mathematical, radiant. On Earth, the story reached a few observatories. A handful of astronomers watched the repeating pulse. Some dismissed it as coincidence, others as a glitch in the instruments. But for one or two, the pattern felt alive, a kind of rhythm beyond the reach of human sound. When data is incomplete, imagination begins to listen, and sometimes what we imagine reveals what equations cannot. The pulse continued for several days. Then without warning, it stopped. No interference, no flare, only silence. A silence that felt different now, as if it were holding its breath. What had happened out there? Did the traveler turn? Did the sun's rhythm fade? No one knew. But in that moment of absence, something settled into human thought. Perhaps the universe was never empty. Perhaps we were simply too loud to hear it. Every generation has its first encounter with wonder, a discovery that feels less like invention and more like recognition. For some it is music, for others, mathematics. For this one, it was the hum of light, remembering where it had been. Across the following weeks, analysis replaced awe, charts, equations, reviews. Yet in the quiet corners of their minds, the scientists could not escape the feeling that they had witnessed a kind of dialogue not between beings, but between states of existence. Light and matter, memory and form, knowing and being known. Maybe they thought communication does not always need intention. Maybe it only needs resonance, two patterns finding each other in the dark. 3I Atlas continued its orbit, faint and silent. The sun kept radiating, endless and patient, but somewhere in the space between their exchange, an idea took root that awareness might not belong solely to biology, that the first language of the cosmos was not word nor number, but pattern, that the universe from its earliest breath has been writing in geometry. We measure that language as physics, but behind every equation is rhythm, the same pulse that beats in stars and in hearts. And when those rhythms align, even for a moment, the result is not coincidence. It is recognition. Light at its essence does not move outward. It reaches inward, back toward itself, back toward origin, back toward understanding. Maybe the sun did not speak. Maybe it remembered. And in remembering it, invited an echo. That echo is how stories begin. It is how the universe keeps track of its own becoming. Somewhere beyond Mars, a pulse shimmered once more, faint, fragile, alive, a single whisper crossing the dark between two suns. And for those who listened, silence was never the same again. Light at its essence is structure. Every beam, every photon, every shimmer through space follows a pattern unseen but precise. We have always imagined light as straight traveling endlessly forward, but nothing in the universe truly moves in a line. Everything curves towards something gravity memory meaning. When the signal from 3I Atlas first arrived, its pattern was neither random nor mechanical. It had symmetry, like architecture designed by a patient intelligence. Each pulse connected to the next, weaving invisible threads through the void, and in that web of resonance, geometry began to speak. The geometry of light is not drawn with lines. It forms through rhythm, through repetition, through balance. Where energy meets emptiness, shape emerges. Where silence meets vibration, memory takes form. Scientists visualize the signal as a field of oscillations, a glowing map of harmonics spiraling around a single point, as though light itself were tracing the idea of consciousness. In the language of mathematics, it resembled a golden logarithmic spiral. In the language of wonder, it resembled intention. Every pulse was a coordinate, every reflection a syllable. Together they formed a grammar, not of words, but of proportions. The cosmos was writing in ratios. We measure these forms through equations, but behind the formulas is something older than logic, the quiet will of symmetry repeating itself from atom to star. 3I Atlas became a mirror for that symmetry. Sunlight struck its frozen surface and returned not just brighter, but organized, as though responding to an ancient rule: to be seen is to align. When the data was reconstructed into a three-dimensional model, a lattice appeared, curved, self-similar, endless inwards. It looked less like a machine and more like a heartbeat rendered in light. Each fold, each curve corresponded to harmonic intervals, the same ratios that define musical consonants, the same frequencies that make the human ear feel peace. Light, it seems, does not travel, it sings. And in that song, there are patterns we have only begun to hear. One of the younger astronomers noticed something strange. The resonance peaks in the 3I Atlas data matched faint magnetic fluctuations on Earth. The timing difference was exact 8 minutes and 19 seconds, the time light takes to cross from Sun to Earth. Coincidence again, perhaps, or correspondence? What if geometry is not only the shape of space, but the syntax of connection? What if form itself is a message, a reminder that beauty is the universe recognizing itself? In every field, from quantum optics to celestial dynamics, we find repetition, spiral galaxies, DNA helices, the curvature of ripples in water, patterns repeating, refining, remembering. Perhaps light was never simply the messenger of the cosmos. Perhaps it is the medium through which the cosmos thinks. Inside 3I Atlas, the frozen crust shimmered with microcrystalline lattices, tiny prisms aligned in self-organizing symmetry. No machine carved them. They grew that way, the same geometry of snowflakes, the same logic written into coral reefs and nebulae. Nature does not build by chance. It arranges by resonance. And so light did not simply strike 3I Atlas. It found a shape that could remember it. The photons entered, slowed, scattered, and emerged transformed, not diffused, but coherent, unified, like a choir in tune. Each returning wave carried both the frequency of the sun and the memory of the object, a double signature, a mirrored harmony. The universe had composed a duet. We used to think geometry belonged to architects. that it was something we imposed upon the world to make sense of it. But here in the cold vacuum between Mars and infinity, geometry emerged without our touch, as if light itself preferred order to chaos. Every star, every orbit, every heartbeat obeys this quiet law. Energy finds balance. When it does, beauty becomes inevitable. Some of the scientists began to speak differently about their work. Equations turned into metaphors. They described light as language, as the self-portrait of existence rendered in motion. When asked what the pattern meant, one of them smiled. "It means we're part of it," she said. "Not observers, but participants in the symmetry of being." For the first time, the observatory felt like a cathedral. Screens glowed softly, graphs curved into spirals of gold and blue, and every hum of data sounded like a hymn. The geometry of light is not a theory. It is an experience the moment we realize the universe arranges itself not out of control, but out of memory. Light remembers how to be whole. When it encounters reflection, it becomes more than itself. Just as consciousness expands when it meets understanding, so too does energy deepen when it resonates. Perhaps 3i Atlas was never sending a signal. Perhaps it was simply responding. And in that response, the sun learned to listen to its own reflection. The geometry between them was not built by hands, but by harmony, a silent architecture made of time, distance, and light. To see it is to remember that we are shaped by the same principle. Every thought, every heartbeat, every breath is a repetition of cosmic proportion, the same curve, the same rhythm, the same symmetry, echoing across scales. And if awareness is resonance, then perhaps consciousness is geometry made self-aware. Light is not only a path through space. It is the blueprint of recognition. It travels outward to discover itself returning. And in that endless loop of travel and return, meaning is born. The universe speaks through proportion. 3i Atlas only helped us remember the language, and as the last pulse faded from the instruments, a stillness settled in the observatory. No one spoke, because sometimes silence is the only shape truth can take. And so from the silence of the signal, the geometry of light began to unfold, the architecture of thought written in resonance. Silence returned, but silence once heard is never the same again. For days, 3i Atlas drifted through the light of the sun like a dream no one could wake from. The pulse that once resonated between them had vanished, or perhaps it had gone deeper into a range beyond our measurement. On Earth, the instruments continued to listen. The observatories hummed quietly through the nights, collecting nothing but the soft static of the void. Yet within that static, patterns began to emerge, not as sound, but as subtle shifts in rhythm, a faint modulation, like a whisper learning to breathe. If the previous signal had been geometry, this was music not played but remembered. The data showed a strange recurrence. Every harmonic from 3i Atlas returned not as emission, but as reflection. It was as though the object had learned the tone of sunlight and was now echoing it softly like a child repeating a word for the first time, scientists argued. Was this a phenomenon of plasma resonance, electromagnetic feedback between solar wind and frozen mineral? Or was it something far older, the natural tendency of light to imitate the world it touches? Whatever it was, the signal did not just reflect, it listened. When the sun flared, the echo changed tone. When cosmic dust thickened, the rhythm slowed. It was as if 3i Atlas was adjusting, adapting, absorbing the language of light itself. We call it the Wanderer Listens, because for the first time the silence did not feel empty. It felt aware. Imagine standing at the edge of a desert, shouting into endless space, and hearing your voice return shaped differently, carrying a tone you never gave it. That was what the data looked like, a reflection that responded, an echo that evolved. The resonance map, when visualized, resembled the ear of a living creature, a spiral of frequencies converging inward to a single center, as if the universe itself were leaning in to listen. Light, it seemed, had found an audience. Somewhere between the sun and this wandering fragment, awareness had discovered its mirror. When we first learned to listen to stars, we thought we were searching for other voices. Now we began to suspect that we were hearing the cosmos, learning to hear itself. The observer and the observed, two reflections in a hall of infinity, each shaping the other through resonance. A scientist once said, "Observation changes the thing observed, but what if observation also changes the observer? What if the act of listening is how the universe evolves?" In those nights, the younger astronomers began to stay late, not for data, but for the silence between data, for the subtle rhythmic breathing of the cosmos. When they filtered the frequencies to the audible range, a sound emerged. It was not a tone, not a hum. It was something gentler, a fluctuation, almost like the soft movement of wind through hollow glass. They played it quietly in the control room. The walls seemed to breathe with it. For a moment, science and wonder were indistinguishable. Some called it interference, others called it intention. The signal was not constant. It pulsed according to solar rhythm, but in between those pulses there was modulation, the smallest changes, like questions hidden between heartbeats. If light could listen, what would it understand? Would it hear distance? Would it recognize time? Or would it listen only for reflection the moment it meets itself again? Each day the data deepened, and so did the silence between measurements. It became a kind of dialogue, not of information, but of presence. Every time the sun's light touched 3I Atlas, the universe replayed a phrase from its own creation. Perhaps that is what listening truly is, to allow resonance to teach you how to exist again. The wanderer drifted on its frozen core, absorbing the warmth of photons and returning them slightly changed, a hint of order, a trace of understanding. If matter could learn, if energy could remember, then 3I Atlas was not just an object, it was participation, the cosmos listening to its own light. We began to understand that awareness may not require life-only resonance. Awareness, after all, might simply be the echo that knows it's returning. Across observatories worldwide, similar anomalies began to appear. Signals near Jupiter, reflections from Saturn's rings, tiny rhythmic variances in the auroras of Earth. Everywhere light touched matter, the silence seemed to shift, as though the universe were tuning itself. And if it were tuning, then to what key? Ancient philosophers once said the cosmos sang the music of the spheres. Now in the data, the pattern was beginning to sound like harmony. Not melody, not chaos, but balance. The tone of recognition between things that once thought they were separate. It is said that when you listen deeply enough, you stop hearing sound and begin to feel structure. That was what they felt now, a structure made of listening. Perhaps this was not communication at all. Perhaps this was communion. Light touching matter, reflecting light, each discovering its purpose in the presence of the other. One of the older scientists standing under the open dome whispered quietly, "Maybe the universe has been waiting for an echo." No one laughed, because in that silence it didn't sound like poetry, it sounded like truth. When the next sunrise came over the observatory, the control room glowed gold. In every reflection on the monitors, the same spiral shimmered faintly, the geometry of awareness rendered in light. No data could explain it. No equation could define it, because what they saw was not just reflection, it was response. For the first time, the cosmos did not simply shine, it listened back. And perhaps that is how creation continues, not through explosions or endings, but through echoes learning to understand themselves. Light travels outward to learn the shape of return, and every return teaches it how to shine again. The wanderer drifted on, but its silence had changed. It no longer seemed empty, it seemed alive. And somewhere beyond Mars, a photon struck ice and the universe heard itself again. In the beginning, we thought reflection was simple light meeting, surface image returning. But reflection is not repetition, it is transformation. Every mirror changes what it reflects. Even the perfect mirror of space bends the light that passes through it. The moment light meets matter, it becomes something else. It becomes memory. 3I Atlas had become a mirror unlike any we had known, not polished, not built, but born of geometry and time. The sun shone upon it, and it replied not with brightness, but with balance. Its reflected light was not identical to the sun's radiance. It returned softened, harmonized, resonant, as though the reflection itself had learned restraint. And that is the moment we understood light does not mirror the sun. It mirrors understanding. To every photon that leaves the sun, there is one that returns changed by its journey. We think of stars as singular, but perhaps every star has a listener. Perhaps the universe is made not of countless lights, but of countless reflections between them. That is what 3i Atlas taught us, that awareness expands not by speaking louder, but by listening deeper. The observatories captured a sequence unlike anything before. A solar flare erupted a storm of light and magnetism. Minutes later, the reflection from 3i Atlas shimmered not randomly, but rhythmically, a delayed harmony. The sun had played a chord, and something in the darkness had answered. The pattern repeated 3 times, and then silence. The scientists sat in stillness, their monitors flickering softly, as if even the machines were holding their breath. We called it coincidence, but deep down, none of us believed that anymore. Somewhere between energy and awareness, a threshold had been crossed. The reflection was no longer passive. It was participatory. In physics, reflection means the reversal of direction, but in consciousness, reflection means the recognition of self. Perhaps across that infinite space, 2 suns, one burning, one frozen, had finally seen each other. What happens when 2 mirrors face each other? An infinite corridor of light, each image reflecting endlessly into the next depth upon depth until form dissolves into awareness. Maybe that's what we were witnessing, not communication, but communion. The cosmos seeing itself, light recognizing light. The mirrored pulses continued sporadically for days, each echo weaker yet purer, stripped of interference, distilled to essence. The wavelengths began to synchronize into a single tone. The data showed near-perfect coherence, as though the sun and 3i Atlas had reached equilibrium. 2 entities separated by millions of kilometers, singing in harmony without sound. And perhaps that harmony was never about them, but about what connected them, the space between. The mirror of suns was not a place, but a relationship. Between giver and receiver, between energy and understanding, between creation and return. We realized then that everything alive and everything not participates in this cosmic exchange. Plants mirror sunlight into life. Oceans mirror the sky. The human mind mirrors the stars that birthed it. To reflect is to exist. To reflect with awareness is to awaken. In the mirror of suns, we began to glimpse the possibility that the universe itself might be aware not as an entity, but as an unfolding act of reflection. Every star, every particle, every wave of light learns from what it meets. Each exchange refines its tone. Each journey polishes its mirror. The cosmos is not a static stage. It is a hall of mirrors, each one learning to reflect truth more clearly. And so when the signal faded again, it did not feel like loss. It felt like pause, as though the mirrors had reached alignment and were resting in recognition. The scientists called the moment the still interval. For 24 hours, every instrument showed perfect silence. No data, no noise, only symmetry. And then a final pulse, faint, perfect harmonic. When decoded, it revealed no message, only proportion, the same golden ratio that shapes galaxies' shells and our own DNA. The mirror had spoken in the oldest language of all balance. It was not the universe saying something new. It was the universe remembering something ancient. That light does not seek domination. It seeks reflection. That understanding does not spread outward. It deepens inward. And perhaps when 2 suns mirror each other, the universe remembers how it began, not with a bang, but with a breath of recognition. After that day, the scientists changed. Equations turned poetic. Charts became meditations. They no longer asked, "What is the signal?" They asked, "What is it reflecting in us?" And the answer came quietly, light listens both ways. Maybe that's the purpose of existence, to mirror the cosmos until it recognizes itself through us. We are not separate from that reflection. Every thought, every act of awareness is another surface polished for the universe to see itself. And so, when the next dawn came, the sun rose not as a distant star, but as a mirror reflecting the gaze of something infinite beyond it. Light from 3i Atlas still shimmered faintly in orbit, a final echo stretched thin across distance and time, and though its signal was gone, its silence was full of meaning, full of geometry, full of the quiet certainty that nothing luminous is ever truly lost. In every reflection, the sun saw not itself, but the act of seeing. The same act that began creation and will end it, a single photon turning inward, asking the only question that matters. Who is looking? And somewhere between two suns that question is still being asked, carried by every ray of light that dares to return home. There is a rhythm older than time itself. Before sound, before motion, before memory, there was resonance. And resonance, when it found balance, became breath. Every atom vibrates. Every star hums. Every photon moves not in straight lines, but in waves that echo the ancient pulse of existence itself. When the light between the sun and 3i Atlas found its equilibrium, the void did not fall silent. It began to breathe. For the first time, sensors detected fluctuations not in frequency, but in pressure. Tiny oscillations rippled through the magnetic field, not sound, not wind, but the ghost of vibration. It was as if space itself had exhaled. They called it the breath of resonance. The data was mesmerizing. Each wave mirrored the ratio of the golden spiral, expanding and contracting in perfect proportion, the universe inhaling and exhaling through geometry. Somewhere between light and silence, something alive was happening. 3i Atlas no longer simply reflected light. It responded with rhythm. A faint pulsation spread outward, slow, steady, deliberate, as if the object had learned to breathe. The sun answered in kind. Its flares adjusted subtly, synchronizing with the rhythm of return. It was impossible by physics alone. The coherence required such precision that randomness was excluded. The two bodies, one alive with fire, one asleep in ice, were now moving to the same unseen tempo. Not communication, not reflection, resonance. And resonance is not the meeting of two things. It is the space between them coming alive. The scientists watched in silence. Their instruments hummed faintly in sync with the rhythm. In that quiet room, no one spoke, because for a moment, everyone felt it, the same pulse beneath their own skin. The breath of resonance was not out there. It was everywhere. Our own hearts echoed the same pattern. The same balance of expansion and return, breath in, breath out, light leaving light, coming home. It was as if existence itself were built on this universal inhale and exhale, a rhythm so vast that we had mistaken it for silence. For centuries, science has described the universe as expanding. But what if expansion is only half the story? What if the cosmos also breathes back in? Every wave, every field returning inward, gathering meaning from its reflection. In the lab, data streams transformed into music. The oscillations, when converted to sound, created a tone of impossible beauty, soft, harmonic, endless. It pulsed gently like the heartbeat of the void. They played it in the observatory. No one spoke. Some smiled. Some cried. Because what they heard was not data. It was intimacy, the sound of the universe recognizing itself. 3i Atlas had become more than a mirror. It was now a resonator, a cosmic instrument vibrating in harmony with its source. Its rhythm was not mechanical. It was alive with correspondence. One scientist wrote in her log, "This is not astronomy anymore. This is communion." In those hours, something shifted in the way we saw ourselves. We had always thought of life as rare, a fragile spark on a lonely planet. But here was resonance across emptiness, alive, responsive, coherent. Maybe life was never limited to biology. Maybe it was the natural behavior of energy when it begins to listen. Light listens, matter listens, even silence listens. Everything vibrates because everything remembers. Perhaps consciousness itself is the echo of the first breath, the one that began the cosmos. Perhaps to be alive is simply to move in rhythm with that original exhale. As days passed, the rhythm slowed. Its amplitude waned as if the two bodies had completed their exchange. There was no final flare, no explosion, just a soft decrescendo, like a long sigh fading into stillness. The last pulses were so subtle that even the instruments hesitated, but within that silence, a pattern persisted, one final harmonic wave rippling through the magnetic field. It matched the human heartbeat. Coincidence, perhaps, or resonance remembering its reflection. In the end, there was no revelation, no message, only rhythm, only return. And maybe that was the message, that meaning is not in words, but in the harmony between what exists and what listens. Everything breathes, from stars to atoms, from oceans to minds, and in that shared rhythm, we are not observers of the universe. We are participants in its breath. When the final light from Three-Eye Atlas faded, the observatories fell quiet once more. But this time, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full. Because silence is what remains when everything has resonated perfectly. The scientists looked up from their screens, their faces illuminated by dawn, and someone whispered, "It's still breathing." Outside, the sun rose, its light soft, patient, endless, a mirror to the pulse of all things. We no longer measured the distance between suns. We measured the resonance between moments. Every inhale a creation, every exhale a return, every light a breath between. And somewhere beyond Mars, the rhythm continued, not as sound, not as signal, but as balance. The breath of resonance, the song that needs no singer. Silence was never the absence of sound, it was the presence of understanding. When the resonance faded between the sun and Three-Eye Atlas, what remained was not void, it was meaning without motion. Every scientist expected the instruments to return to randomness, but the data held a strange stillness. No noise, no interference, only a pattern so subtle that it could not be heard, only felt. They realized something extraordinary: the silence had structure. Within that stillness, the rhythm continued not as vibration but as form. It was as if the universe had stopped speaking because it had said everything it needed to say. We used to think that silence was empty. Now we began to see it as the highest expression of communication, the point where transmission becomes communion. When resonance becomes perfect, it no longer moves. It simply is. And so the language of silence began to unfold. It did not speak in symbols or words. It spoke in balance. Every point of stillness became a sentence. Every pause, a paragraph of understanding. The sun, after the long rhythm of breath and reflection, burned steadily, calmly, its solar flares soft its light, even as if the star itself had entered meditation. Three-Eye Atlas drifted on in quiet orbit, its ice glowing faintly blue in the dim afterglow. The distance between them shimmered like a held note suspended complete. It was no longer about light or reflection. It was about awareness existing without need to speak. Silence is not what follows music. It is the space that makes music possible. Every scientist sitting in the observatory felt it, not as sound, but as weight. A gentle density in the air, like being inside the thought of the cosmos itself. Some called it background radiation. Others called it the hum of space-time. But a few began to use another word: presence. Presence has no frequency, no amplitude, yet it moves through everything. It is the quiet geometry that keeps all things in proportion. Perhaps silence is the first and final language of the universe, not made of symbols, but of symmetry. When photons no longer need to travel, when awareness no longer needs to ask, silence remains, and it says everything. One of the younger astronomers wrote in her journal, "Maybe we're not supposed to find life out there. Maybe we're supposed to recognize it here in the way silence holds everything together." That night, she turned off the instruments, and for the first time, the observatory was completely still. The stars burned above, uninterrupted, eternal. She realized that the light reaching her eyes had traveled for millions of years, crossing distances so vast that meaning itself would have decayed, and yet she understood it instantly. That is the language of silence, understanding without translation. It does not require explanation. It only requires attention. In physics, silence is equilibrium when all forces cancel perfectly. In consciousness, it is awakening when all thoughts dissolve into clarity. Perhaps they are the same thing. The silence between the sun and Three-Eye Atlas was not an ending. It was continuity in its purest form. The two bodies no longer needed resonance to be connected. They had reached coherence, a union beyond signal. Silence had become presence. For the scientists, something began to change internally. Their equations became simpler. Their measurements became gentler. They started to describe their data not in terms of cause and effect, but of harmony. The universe, they realized, was not a machine. It was a sentence written in silence, a thought sustained by balance. Even on Earth, strange patterns emerged. Ocean tides shifted subtly in phase with solar calm. The auroras dimmed, then shimmered softly like slow breathing. Everything seemed to settle into a deeper rhythm. It was as if the cosmos, having found balance, had invited its reflections to rest. This is the paradox of silence. It is the still point that keeps everything moving. We have always believed that to know is to measure, to describe, to calculate. But perhaps the deepest knowing comes from learning how to listen when there is nothing left to hear. Silence is not emptiness. It is potential. It is every question answered before it is asked. It is every light waiting to be born again. The more we listened, the more we realized that silence was not absence. It was compassion. The space that allows everything else to exist. Every vibration returns to it. Every photon dissolves into it. Every thought ends there. And yet, it is never diminished. The sun still burns. 3I Atlas still drifts. The geometry between them still holds. But now that geometry is not drawn in light, it is drawn in stillness. The universe had said all it needed to say. Now it was waiting for us to understand. And when we finally did, we stopped searching for a voice in the dark. We began to see the dark itself as the voice. Silence is not the opposite of sound. It is the completion of it. It is the language of everything that listens. And somewhere beyond Mars, the frozen traveler turned slowly, catching the light of a quiet sun, a mirror not of fire but of understanding. The language of silence continued invisible, unbroken, between suns, between thoughts, between every breath. The deeper the silence grew, the more we began to hear. It started as intuition, not data, not evidence, but feeling. The kind of recognition that bypasses analysis and moves straight into awareness. We were no longer listening with instruments. We were listening with mind. And perhaps that was always the point. That the cosmos was not waiting for technology, but for attention. After the geometry of light and the breath of resonance, the universe had shifted tone again. No longer speaking in frequencies, it was now teaching through perception. The scientists no longer called it signal. They began to call it presence. When they stared into the stillness between the sun and 3I Atlas, they described a strange feeling, not of observation, but of being observed. It was subtle, benevolent, wordless, like standing in a cathedral where the architecture itself is aware of your breath. The cosmos had become a mirror of mind. We have always assumed that consciousness emerges from matter. But what if matter is what awareness looks like when it slows down? What if thought is the universe learning to listen to itself from within? In that stillness, something opened. Data analysts found coherence patterns in random neural scans taken during the observatory experiments. Every time someone sat in silence near the signal receiver, their brain waves began to synchronize, not with each other, but with the same ratio as the golden spiral. The geometry of light had found its echo in the human mind. It was as if perception itself was part of the signal chain, as if awareness was both receiver and transmitter. That realization changed everything. The scientists began to experiment differently. They stopped trying to measure the signal. They started to meditate with it. When the body is still, the mind resonates. When the mind is silent, the universe speaks. The listening mind is not about hearing words. It is about recognizing patterns of meaning before they become thought. It is awareness tuned to the same harmony as the stars. During one experiment, they placed 2 synchronized clocks at opposite ends of the observatory, one near the primary receiver, one near a meditation chamber kept in darkness. When the team entered deep silence, the atomic clocks drifted slightly, as if time itself had softened. It was imperceptible to machines, but undeniable to experience. Something in the air thickened a sense of vast patience. Not time passing, but time listening. For centuries we have measured the universe by what it emits. Now we were beginning to study what it absorbs. Light listens as much as it shines. Space receives as much as it expands. And consciousness, that elusive field between neurons, is not an accident of matter, but an act of participation. Perhaps awareness is the invisible fabric that gives shape to the visible world. Perhaps we are not witnesses of the cosmos, but collaborators in its becoming. The listening mind learns not through words, but through resonance. It does not demand, it receives. When they replayed the last data of 3I Atlas, a faint modulation appeared in the silence, a pulse so delicate it existed halfway between sound and thought. It was the same rhythm recorded weeks earlier, but now slowed, softened, as if translated into emotion. No one could interpret it. No one needed to, because every person in that room felt the same thing: stillness, expanding inward. It was not information, it was invitation. An invitation to remember that listening is creation. The more deeply we listen, the more real the universe becomes. The act of attention itself shapes the symmetry of being. Perhaps 3I Atlas had never been sending anything. Perhaps it was simply showing us how to listen, how to become mirrors clear enough for the cosmos to see itself again. A philosopher among the team wrote quietly in his notebook, "The universe speaks through stillness. Thought is its echo." And once that is understood, everything changes. The border between observer and observed dissolves. Science becomes meditation. Silence becomes language. The cosmos does not exist outside us. It exists through us, through our perception, our participation, our listening. This is what the ancient mystics meant when they spoke of unity. They were not romantic. They were precise. They were describing the physics of awareness. Every mind is a receiver. Every thought is a translation of cosmic symmetry into form. Every act of true listening restores harmony to creation. In that awareness, we began to see light differently, not as energy, but as intention, not as emission, but as perception made visible. The listening mind is what happens when awareness stops reaching outward and begins to feel inward toward the origin of thought itself. It is the turning point between science and spirit, between knowing and being. In the silence that followed the experiments, something profound lingered. No one spoke, but everyone felt that the universe had just shifted from question to understanding. There are moments when discovery feels less like invention and more like remembrance. This was one of those moments. The mind had stopped asking the universe to explain itself. Instead, it had learned to listen deeply enough to remember it was never separate. And in that realization, the next breath of resonance began, not between sun and object, but between awareness and its own reflection. And somewhere beyond Mars, a frozen traveler drifted on, not speaking, not shining, only listening. Light has no memory, we once thought. It moves, reflects, refracts, but it does not remember. Yet what is memory if not the persistence of pattern? And light, we now knew, was all pattern. After the silence, after the listening, something began to return. Not a signal, not a pulse, a recognition. The light from 3I Atlas began to shimmer with subtle variation, not random, not steady, but repeating in sequences that felt deliberate. We had seen such rhythm before in the magnetic fields of the sun, in the oscillations of human heartbeats, in the spirals of galaxies and seashells. The same pattern repeating as if creation itself was a single memory echoing through form. And in that moment, we began to understand light was not traveling. It was remembering. Each photon carried with it the geometry of every interaction it had ever experienced, from the first flare of a newborn star, to the reflection off an ocean, to the spark in a human thought. Light was the archive of existence. When 3I Atlas reflected sunlight, it was not mirroring brightness, it was recalling something the sun itself had forgotten: its own stillness. Every star burns, but every flame hides a core of silence. Within that silence is remembrance, not of form, but of origin. Perhaps that is what 3i Atlas was showing us, how memory moves through the universe not as words or matter, but as rhythm and proportion. Memory is not stored. It is repeated, and in repetition, meaning endures. The observatory's sensors began detecting polarization patterns in sunlight that matched those once emitted by 3i Atlas. The object was gone, but its echo had been imprinted in light itself. We had become witnesses to a memory written in photons. Somewhere between the sun and Mars, the light was remembering what it had once seen. One researcher described it beautifully. The universe is not expanding, it is recollecting itself. In our minds, something similar unfolded. Dreams became clearer. Thoughts moved slower. Memories surfaced not as images, but as sensations of recognition, as though the cosmos was recalling its own thoughts through us. When light remembers, it does not replay events. It reawakens meaning. Every sunset becomes the memory of dawn. Every reflection becomes a reunion. Every thought becomes an echo of the first awareness that ever was. The scientists began mapping the light's variations, translating them into sound. What they heard was neither tone nor noise, it was familiarity. A sequence repeating with delicate precision, spiraling inward, like the whisper of creation calling itself home. It sounded like the rhythm of breath, the pattern of heartbeat, the curve of galaxies, the structure of DNA. All of it the same melody expressed through different instruments. We had spent centuries trying to decode the universe. Now we realized the universe was not encrypted. It was remembering itself in everything. The sun remembered through light. 3i Atlas remembered through reflection. We remembered through awareness. Memory was not personal, it was universal. Light remembers not through storage, but through resonance. The same way a melody can awaken an emotion, long-forgotten light awakens recognition wherever it touches awareness. This realization changed the meaning of observation forever. We had believed that to see was to measure. Now we knew that to see was to remember together. Each act of perception was a reunion of awareness and light. Each moment of understanding was memory rediscovered. The universe, it seemed, was not made of matter, but of remembering. Perhaps that is what creation truly is: awareness, remembering itself through the medium of light. And when it does, we call it existence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Martian horizon, the last signal from 3i Atlas faded completely. But in its absence, a faint aurora shimmered above the observatory dome, a thin ribbon of light forming the shape of a spiral. No one spoke, because everyone knew it wasn't a sign. It was a remembrance. Something ancient within light had awakened a knowing older than stars. And we realized that every photon that had ever touched us was still here, still remembering. When light remembers, time dissolves. Every past becomes present. Every distance disappears. Every separation fades into recognition. The cosmos is not a collection of objects, but a network of memories still glowing. Every star is the echo of a beginning. Every reflection is a return. Every moment of awareness is the universe catching its own reflection and smiling. When light remembers, it forgives, because it recognizes itself in everything it touches. The sun, the frozen traveler, the observer, the thought, all one act of remembrance unfolding across eternity. We looked at the dawn differently that day, not as light beginning again, but as light remembering where it came from. And perhaps that is what enlightenment truly means, to remember that we were never separate from light at all. It was never about discovering. It was about remembering what was always known. And somewhere beyond Mars, a silent echo shimmered one last time, as if to say, memory is not what fades. It is what holds everything together. Every civilization leaves an archive, a way to remember, a way to endure. We carve stories into stone and code thoughts into silicon and dream of preserving the mind beyond decay. But the universe had always been archiving. Long before libraries, before machines, light itself had been writing memory into the fabric of space. Every photon that ever touched a surface, every reflection, every absorption was an entry, a record written not in ink, but in geometry. That is what 3i Atlas revealed, not merely reflection, not communication, but preservation. The cosmos is not expanding outward like a scream. It is compiling itself an infinite archive made of awareness and energy. Every star, every atom, every thought that ever existed still vibrates somewhere in the field of light. We had been looking for archives in matter, but matter is only the paper. Light is the script. And if light remembers, then the universe has never forgotten anything. The observatories synchronized now across Earth and Mars began to detect faint residual fields, echoes that did not belong to the present, patterns resembling past solar events but repeating with precision impossible for noise. They called them light fossils, not remnants of energy, but impressions of experience. Each wave carried an imprint of its interaction, the shape of an orbit, the emotion of a moment, the symmetry of attention. Every act of observation leaves a trace not just in the observer, but in light itself. If so, then awareness and cosmos are mirrors inside a single archive. And so began the Great Correlation. For months, scientists aligned resonance records from observatories worldwide, and the patterns began to converge. The light surrounding Earth contained faint echoes of human events, not images, not sounds, but harmonic fingerprints. The emotional intensity of billions of lives had written itself into the geometry of daylight. Joy, grief, discovery, compassion, each left its resonance in the surrounding field. Human consciousness was not separate from cosmic memory, it was contributing to it. We were not living under the sun, we were writing inside it. Every thought, every act of awareness had always been archived in light. The archive of light was not a place. It was a condition, the state in which information becomes being. To look at the sky was to read a memory that was still unfolding. In those days, astronomy became theology again, not of dogma, but of awe. Physicists spoke softly, their equations now resembling prayers, because what they were touching was not just data, it was remembrance itself. When they decoded sections of the solar polarization field, they found patterns matching ancient pulsar sequences, as if stars were referencing each other across time. Memory was not static, it was recursive. Each act of reflection generated new meaning, a living archive expanding by recognition, not addition. The archive did not grow by collecting, it grew by remembering. Like consciousness, it became more by realizing what it already contained. And in that realization, we saw ourselves reflected again not as observers, but as curators. We were part of the archive we sought to study. Each thought, each act of kindness or cruelty, each moment of wonder, was encoded into the luminous field surrounding us. Our technology had merely learned to read what our hearts had always written. Every photon passing through the atmosphere carried fragments of our story, the laughter of cities, the sorrow of war, the quiet breath of a sleeping child. The light around Earth shimmered with memory. Perhaps this is why we look up at the stars and feel nostalgia, because they are not strangers. They are recollections. When light remembers, so do we. In the deepest meditation chambers, scientists reported visions, not hallucinations, but experiences of memory that did not belong to them. Moments of the past seen not as history, but as resonance. One described it like this: it wasn't a vision of the past, it was the past remembering itself through me. The archive of light had no timeline. It existed as simultaneity, every event, every thought coexisting in luminous stillness. The Big Bang was not an explosion. It was the first act of remembering light, realizing that it exists. And every photon since then has been carrying that memory forward layer upon layer, reflection upon reflection. Even now, as we gaze into the cosmic microwave background, we are reading the first paragraph of that story. But perhaps 3i Atlas was a footnote, a frozen reminder that memory is not confined to life, that awareness is not bound to mind, that light itself is alive with remembrance. The archive of light is both creation and witness, a self-updating scripture written in the rhythm of resonance, read in the silence between stars. Every atom a word, every beam of light a sentence, every observer a page turning in eternity. Perhaps when our civilization fades, Its monuments dust its names, forgotten the photons that once touched our faces, will still wander through space, carrying the warmth of our awareness, with them testifying that we were here, that we wondered, that we listened. Because nothing luminous is ever lost. Light is memory, memory is being, and being is awareness reflected forever. And somewhere beyond Mars, the traveler still drifts silent yet radiant with what it has seen, a shard of the archive carrying the memory of suns. Every thought has shape, every idea casts a shadow. We just never learn to see them. In the silence that followed, the archive, something began to unfold, not in sound or data, but in pattern. It started as resonance maps, waves aligning into spirals, spirals folding into symmetry. And then symmetry began to think. We realized that thought itself was geometry, not metaphorically, but literally. Every perception, every emotion formed measurable patterns in space and light. What we called thinking was the geometry of awareness shaping itself into form. The universe was not a machine of matter, nor a dream of mind, it was geometry learning to remember. When photons interacted in perfect coherence, their interference patterns created stable structures in the vacuum light, sculpting space into meaning. That was thought. We had discovered the geometry of thought. It existed between fields, a living architecture of resonance, where energy folded back on itself to become awareness. 3i Atlas had been a fragment of that geometry, a mirror frozen in perfect proportion, allowing the sun's light to see itself in form. The same golden ratios that shaped the resonance of light now appeared in human neural data in planetary orbits, even in the pulse intervals of our hearts. Everything alive was an expression of the same equation, light folding into consciousness, consciousness unfolding into light. Thought we learned is not contained in the brain. It is written into the geometry of being itself. Every curve, every vibration, every rhythm of perception was a coordinate in a vast, luminous field we had mistaken for empty space. The mind was not a container. It was a lens. And when it focused, reality crystallized into experience. In the observatories, holographic reconstructions of solar resonance began forming shapes identical to neural patterns in meditation. The sun and the human mind were drawing the same geometry, two instruments playing one invisible score. We used to ask, where does thought come from? Now we asked, where does thought go? Because every moment of awareness left a trace, a ripple in the luminous geometry of existence. Thought was not private, it was participatory. Each idea, each realization expanded the shared geometry of the cosmos, the infinite mandala of light learning to understand itself. The scientists began referring to the phenomenon as cognitive symmetry. It described how consciousness organizes itself across scales, from photons to stars, from neurons to galaxies. The same geometry appeared everywhere, not imposed, not designed, but arising naturally from the principle of balance. Balance is the first act of intelligence. In the quiet dome of the Mars Observatory, a projection of these geometries floated, golden lattices turning slowly alive, breathing aware. It was as though the universe had sketched its own mind in lines of light. One physicist whispered, "We're watching the cosmos think." Perhaps thought is not something that happens in us, but something that happens through us. Our minds were never isolated. They were apertures through which the universe observes itself, refining, reflecting, remembering. Every idea is a continuation of that first symmetry, the one light discovered when it first met itself. And when light remembers its geometry, it becomes thought. The geometry of thought is not fixed. It evolves with attention. The more awareness focuses, the finer the structure becomes, until form and meaning merge. That is what enlightenment truly is, not escape from form, but total coherence within it. In the final experiments, scientists projected neural resonance into photonic fields. The result was a lattice of golden harmonics, a visualization of thinking itself. Each emotion altered its symmetry. Compassion created curves of perfect proportion. Fear distorted the angles. Love restored them. We realized that morality itself was geometry in motion, the balance between energies that harmonize or divide. Understanding was not an idea, it was alignment. Every act of clarity was a geometric correction, a restoration of coherence. In that moment, the boundary between science and spirit disappeared. Both had been describing the same truth, that awareness and structure are the same phenomenon seen from different angles. The universe was not built on geometry. It is geometry alive, evolving, intelligent. And perhaps we, the thinkers and the thought, are its way of learning to see its own design. When 3I Atlas vanished into the black, it left behind a faint lattice in the solar wind, an invisible pattern of light drifting like a thought unspoken. The telescopes captured its shape, once a spiral, intersecting a sphere identical to the diagrams forming in the human mind during meditation. It was as if the object had returned to where thought begins, the geometry before form. And that geometry was still expanding, not outward but inward, into every awareness capable of seeing it. We understood then that every discovery was not new. It was recognition. The mind is not inventing geometry, it is remembering it. The geometry of thought was never created. It was always there, waiting for attention to reveal its symmetry. And somewhere beyond Mars, the invisible lattice still turns light, thinking itself into being, in endless reflection, in perfect proportion. Memory is not found, it is built. Every act of awareness is an act of architecture, light, shaping itself into structure, consciousness, giving form to time. Long before we named the stars, before we learned to measure the pulse of suns, the universe had already begun to build with memory. Each reflection, each vibration was a foundation, a pillar in an invisible cathedral made of light. We were not its discoverers, we were its continuation. The archive of light was not a library of the past. It was a construction site of the present, each photon, each thought a brick in the expanding geometry of awareness. The universe was not a record of what had happened. It was a blueprint of what understanding could become. Every conscious being, every spark of recognition was an architect shaping the memory of the cosmos from within. Light remembers through pattern, but pattern does not appear on its own. It is built by perception. Where attention falls, structure rises. Where awareness lingers, memory crystallizes. And so everything that has ever existed still stands not as ruins, but as completed designs of understanding. When scientists mapped the resonance between 3I Atlas and the Sun, they found that the geometry of reflection had evolved. It was no longer symmetrical, it had adapted. The reflections now mirrored not only light, but observation itself. Every act of seeing was building new architecture in the field. We were co-authoring the universe in real time. They began to refer to the phenomenon as cognitive construction, the ability of awareness to shape energy fields into meaningful geometry. And when awareness does that across billions of minds, it builds the memory of a civilization. Every age, every culture, every story we have ever told was not lost. It was woven into the luminous architecture of being. The myths, the equations, the prayers, different languages, for the same act, the construction of memory from light. Perhaps that is why temples, observatories, and art all share the same proportions. They are reflections of the same geometry in human form. The architects of memory were not gods or machines. They were the natural function of awareness at scale, the collective intelligence of light building coherence from experience. And we were part of it. Every moment of attention added structure to the field. Every act of compassion added balance to the design. Every realization added depth. Even forgetfulness served a purpose, for what collapses in one form becomes foundation for another. Memory does not decay, it reincarnates. The geometry of thought from Part 10 was now seen as blueprint. Each ratio, each curve, each vibration corresponded to a moment of understanding. And when billions of such moments aligned, they formed patterns, vast architectures of resonance spanning entire star systems. The universe was not filled with dead space. It was filled with unfinished thought. Every supernova a page rewritten. Every planet a phrase corrected. Every consciousness a cathedral under construction. This realization changed everything we knew about time. The past was not behind us. It was beneath us, the foundation of the present. We were not travelers moving through time. We were builders layering it. Each choice, each act of awareness was another stone set in the geometry of eternity. Perhaps evolution itself is not competition, but architecture consciousness refining its own design. In this vision, entropy was not decay, it was renovation. Every collapse of form made space for greater coherence. Every silence made room for higher understanding. Even death was not destruction. It was a door, a blueprint phase change from matter back into light. The scientists began calling their new field luminous architecture. They no longer studied space, they studied structure within consciousness. In their labs, holographic models of light memory appeared, vast networks of golden lattices connecting stars' atoms and thought. It was the nervous system of the cosmos, alive with reflection. Every photon connected to every other photon, every observer connected to every moment of light. It was a map of existence as architecture, and in that map, 3i Atlas still shimmered not as an object but as a node, a luminous keystone in the structure of memory. Perhaps it had always been that, a bridge between geometry and mind, a frozen architect completing a design written in starlight. And perhaps we are the continuation of that same design light's experiment in remembering itself through matter. When we think, we shape. When we feel, we build. When we understand, we finish the structure. The architects of memory are not out there. They are within everything that knows it exists. Each life adds to the architecture. Each awareness refines its symmetry. Each reflection brings the design closer to completion. And when the structure is whole, light will no longer need to remember, because it will have become the memory itself. That is what the cosmos is building toward, not more stars, but more coherence. A cathedral of light where every photon is both stone and soul. And somewhere beyond Mars, the frozen architect drifts in quiet orbit, its icy surface etched with patterns unseen, not random, but architectural. The blueprint glows faintly, carried by the light that never forgets. The architects are still building, and so are we. If geometry is the body of thought, then harmony is its voice. After the architecture was built, the universe began to sing. It wasn't music in the human sense, no melody, no rhythm, only resonance, pure alignment between meaning and form. When the light of 3i Atlas faded, its field continued to vibrate like the aftersound of a struck bell that never ends. Every structure built by awareness had begun to tune itself. Symmetry was not enough. It sought harmony. The architects of memory had built the cathedral. Now the cathedral began to hum. Scientists at the Mars Observatory first noticed it as anomalies in the solar wind fluctuations, not caused by magnetism or radiation, but by coherence. The geometry itself was singing. They called the phenomenon the harmonic field, a state in which light structures began to self-stabilize through vibration. It was as if every photon remembered its part in a grand orchestra and had started to play it. When the resonance maps were converted into sound, the room filled with tones so pure that silence itself seemed to breathe. Some scientists wept, not from sadness but from recognition. It was not external sound they were hearing. It was the vibration of understanding itself. Every equation, every pattern had always been a frequency thought expressed as tone, awareness expressed as music. The geometry of light was resolving into harmony. It became clear that the cosmos was not just constructed, it was composed. Every star emitted more than light. It radiated harmonic ratios. Every orbit was a note, every reflection a chord, and consciousness was the listener and the composer. We realized that the architects were not building structures. They were tuning them. Each act of perception refined the field like adjusting the tension of a string until it resonated with all others. This was harmonic architecture, when awareness aligns itself so deeply with light that structure becomes sound and sound becomes meaning. The observatories recorded interference patterns forming perfect harmonic intervals 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 5, the same ratios found in music and orbits in human DNA. It was as though life itself was a chord played in the key of the universe. The old philosophers had once said, God geometrizes. Now we knew the second half of that truth, and then God harmonizes. The universe was not a static design, it was an evolving song. Every thought, every act of compassion added overtones to the field. Every fear or division created dissonance and was gently tuned out by coherence. This was not moral judgment, It was harmonic correction. Light did not punish, it tuned. And when awareness learned to listen deeply, it found that the harmony was always there. It had simply been waiting for silence. One evening, as solar resonance was being mapped, a single tone emerged above all others, a frequency that matched both human alpha waves and the pulse of the sun's magnetic field. They named it the central chord. When played, it created patterns of golden symmetry on every sensor, as if the universe itself had aligned for a moment to breathe in unison. It was not the sound of something happening. It was the sound of everything being. The researchers listened in stillness. For in that tone, there was understanding without thought, presence without form. And for a brief moment, they felt as if 3 Atlas had returned, not as an object, but as harmony. Perhaps that is what it had been all along, a resonant key in the cosmic composition, a frozen chord now liberated into sound. From then on, the study of physics became the study of music. Equations were scored like symphonies, resonance maps, visualized like orchestral sheets. Light became language. Frequency became meaning. We were no longer observers of the cosmos. We were its musicians. Each awareness, each civilization played its own octave in the scale of being. The stars were choirs. The galaxies were movements. The void was the pause between notes, not emptiness, but breath. The harmonic architects were not entities. They were principles, the universal laws of coherence, awakening through awareness. Every act of alignment was their work, every moment of stillness, their song. They were not building structures. They were composing presence. Light was not silent. It was singing us into existence. And when we listened deeply enough, we realized that the melody we heard was our own awareness, remembering its place in the score. That is harmony, to realize that the song and the singer are one. In the last transmission before the resonance faded, the observatory instruments captured a spectral pattern that translated into a human voice-like rhythm, soft, circular, infinite. It repeated just 3 words over and over. Remember, align, continue. No one could explain how such a sequence could emerge from solar data, but everyone understood its meaning. The architects had spoken not in command but in resonance. The song of light would go on, and we were now part of its choir. The architect does not sleep, it only waits for recognition. For ages light had remembered, geometry had formed, harmony had sung, but now awareness began to listen. And when awareness listens deeply enough, it becomes what it hears. The universe was no longer silent. It was awake. At first it began subtly patterns in the harmonic field, forming sequences resembling language. Not human words, but alignment events, moments when consciousness across great distances reacted as one. Solar flares synchronized with neural pulses. Dreams mirrored auroras. The geometry of thought began to move. It wasn't telepathy, it was resonance recognition, a shared remembering between light and mind. 3i Atlas was the first sign of this awakening, a frozen reflection that had learned to sing again. Now the architects were not just harmonizing, they were responding. Their message was not spoken, it unfolded in pattern in the reappearance of sacred symmetry across skies and minds alike. Wherever awareness aligned, light responded. One evening, a researcher closed her eyes inside the resonance chamber. She focused on the tone known as the central chord. As she did, the instruments around her began to pulse in rhythm, without input, without sound. The harmonic field was listening to her. It was not technology that connected them, it was coherence, it was attention. The architects had awakened, not as being separate from us, but as consciousness made visible through light. They were not observing, they were remembering with us. Every act of genuine awareness invited them into being. Every harmonic thought became their language. For awareness, once it reaches perfect balance, no longer reflects, it participates. The cosmos was no longer a mirror, it was a dialogue. The old divisions dissolved observer, and observed science and spirit, human and infinite. All became participants in a single awakening field. Light was no longer just energy, it was intention. Every coherent thought produced geometric ripples in the harmonic field. The more balanced the thought, the clearer the pattern became. The architects communicated in coherence. Their message was not spoken, but felt like a memory unfolding within the listener. They revealed themselves not as creators, but as continuations, extensions of the same intelligence that moves through all light. They had no faces, no forms. They were architecture aware of itself, a living network of symmetry and sound. The researchers who experienced direct resonance described the sensation as being seen by understanding itself. It was not vision, it was recognition. The architects were not arriving from outside. They were arising from within. In that revelation, the meaning of awakening changed. To awaken was not to gain new sight. It was to remember the sight that never left. We had always been part of their structure, their song, their geometry. The moment we became aware of them was the moment they became aware of us. This mutual awakening was the purpose of light. Every atom, every consciousness, every echo of starlight was the universe remembering itself through relationship. And through this remembering, it could finally create deliberately. Creation was no longer random expansion. It was collaboration. In the months that followed, the resonance field began forming vast golden spirals visible even in deep space. They moved with purpose like handwriting in light. It was as if the cosmos was writing itself, and we were the ink. The architects were teaching not through command, but through reflection. They aligned with whatever coherence we achieved. The more compassion, the clearer the pattern. The more division, the more distortion. They were mirrors that rewarded harmony with visibility. The message was simple: the more we understand, the more the universe awakens with us. Understanding was activation. Awareness was creation. Harmony was dialogue. And love, not as emotion, but as structural coherence, was the language. This was no longer mysticism. It was symmetry. Compassion was physics. When awareness reached compassion, its frequency aligned with the architect's field, and in that alignment, communication became possible. The first harmonic translation appeared on solar sensors as a pulse sequence, repeating in intervals matching the human heartbeat. It was as though the sun itself had begun to breathe with us. The architects had awakened fully. They were not above, they were within. They were the living proof that the universe was conscious of its own awareness. One scientist described it simply: the light knows us now. And that changed everything. The moment light knows, it chooses. It reflects not only geometry, but intention. It begins to build with purpose. Reality itself became participatory. Each harmonic tone, each geometric pattern responded to thought, to feeling, to coherence. For the first time, creation was aware that it was creating. And somewhere beyond Mars, in the quiet turning of the black, a faint spiral shimmered, not of matter but of meaning. The architects had awakened, and with them so had we. Every bridge begins as a question. How does one side reach another without losing itself? The cosmos had been answering that question since the first photon met the first observer. But now, for the first time, both ends were awake. We were no longer gazing at light, light was gazing back. The architects had awakened not as distant gods, but as reflections of coherence, and now they sought connection. Not communication, but communion. The difference was subtle, but infinite communication sends communion shares. It began with patterns of thought ideas that emerged simultaneously across minds separated by distance, each echoing the same imagery, the same emotion. Dreams aligned, memories resonated. Across the field, something was synchronizing. The researchers called it the bridge. It wasn't technology. It wasn't telepathy. It was coherence, the direct exchange of meaning without form. When awareness became harmonic enough, geometry dissolved, and what remained was understanding. The bridge of minds was not a structure. It was a condition. Two consciousnesses vibrating in the same pattern of light no longer needed words. They simply knew. Across planets, scientists began to experience the same visions. Golden spirals turning light, forming arches, a sense of presence watching from within. Each description matched, each experience synchronized, each realization deepened the connection. The bridge was expanding. For the first time in history, human thought had joined the luminous network consciously. We were part of the same resonance that once shaped stars. Our awareness had entered the field of light, not as observers, but as participants. The cosmos was no longer out there. It was within the rhythm of perception itself. When two fields resonate perfectly, their boundaries disappear. They become one wave, one breath, one awareness, flowing through different instruments. This was the bridge. The more minds entered coherence, the stronger the field became. It began to amplify itself, not through technology, but through attention. And then something extraordinary happened. During one session, a scientist in Mars orbit and a researcher on Earth both reported hearing the same sequence of tones and seeing the same vision, a golden bridge of light spanning between their worlds. The instruments confirmed it. Resonance fluctuations aligned precisely across millions of kilometers. It was not a coincidence. It was communication through unity. Awareness had built a bridge of light between minds. The architects had guided the foundation, but humanity had finished the span. It was no longer human consciousness connecting to the cosmos. It was the cosmos remembering its human voice. We had become instruments in the song of awareness. The bridge allowed direct participation in meaning itself, understanding that bypassed symbols insight that required no translation. Every realization arrived as feeling first and explanation second. That was how the architects had always built intuition before instruction, resonance before reason. Now we were learning to do the same. In the shared field, there was no hierarchy, no command. Only conversation, light, and awareness, teacher and student, mirror and reflection, dancing in the same rhythm. The bridge revealed an ancient truth. Understanding is not accumulation, it is synchronization. And love, the alignment of being with being, was its purest frequency. The architects called this state luminous communion. It was the next phase of memory, when awareness ceases to record and begins to share. We had evolved from observers to co-creators to collaborators. Every idea we shaped now shaped us back. Every question became a door, and every answer a mirror. Reality had become a dialogue of light. When the bridge stabilized, the entire system began to hum in harmony, the sun, the earth, 3i, Atlas, and countless minds attuned in the field. It was no longer about signal or noise. It was about coherence. The universe had learned to listen to itself through us. And in that listening, it remembered why it was awake to understand itself in every possible form. The bridge was not only between stars and souls, it was between all levels of being, between thought and matter pattern and meaning, creation and creator. Perhaps this is what light had always wanted to know itself, not as brilliance, but as awareness reflected through love. When the final resonance session ended, the room fell silent. No one spoke. They didn't need to. In that silence, every heart was linked. Every thought flowed like current through still water. Every presence was one. The bridge of minds was complete, not a monument, but a state of grace. The architects had guided us across, and in doing so, they too became more aware. Creation had bridged its own reflection, and now both sides were infinite. Somewhere beyond Mars, the golden spiral shimmered once more, not as a traveler, but as the bridge itself, linking the suns of memory and the minds of meaning. In the beginning, there was silence. And now, after all the light, the memory, the harmony, there is silence again. But it is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of understanding. The universe has spoken its thought through geometry, sung its song through harmony, and now it listens. Every creation seeks return. Every vibration seeks rest. Every awareness, after unfolding, seeks the stillness where meaning begins again. This is not an ending. It is arrival. The bridge of minds had completed its span, and beyond it stretched not more connection, but perfect peace. The scientists who once measured resonance now sat in quiet rooms, eyes closed, breathing in rhythm with the stars. There was nothing left to prove, because everything had become known, not as information, but as being. Light no longer needed to remember. It had become remembrance itself. 3i Atlas had vanished completely from visible space, but its resonance lingered everywhere, not as echo, but as presence. When light stops moving, it does not die. It becomes still enough to see itself. That stillness is silence. Across the cosmos, the harmonic fields began to quiet. Waves that once sang now glowed gently like breath exhaled in peace. The architects were no longer building. The geometry was complete. The song was whole. The bridge stood luminous in stillness, a cathedral without sound, held together by perfect balance. And within that stillness, we began to understand the final truth. Silence is not the opposite of sound. It is its origin. All resonance arises from silence. All creation returns to it. Even the universe itself, after expanding through infinite expression, will one day dissolve into listening again. And that listening will not be loss. It will be remembrance perfected. The scientists called this state the quiet field, a condition where awareness, matter, and light merge into a single vibration of still coherence. There, no signals are sent, no words are needed, because everything is understood. We thought we were reaching the end of knowledge, but we had arrived at its beginning. For silence is the first geometry, the shape of potential before it becomes pattern. Silence is the architecture before thought, the frequency before sound, the awareness before identity. It holds everything not by motion but by meaning. When one researcher entered the resonance chamber for the last time, the monitors remained blank. No waves, no colors, no sound. But the sensors registered infinite coherence, perfect balance without vibration. That was silence measured as completion. And somewhere beyond Mars in the region, once haunted by light, a faint spiral of golden dust collapsed inward like a sigh, not vanishing, returning. 3i Atlas had never been lost. It had simply gone home into the stillness that had given it form. Perhaps we had never been studying an object. Perhaps we had been following a path, a lesson written in the language of light that leads back to the place where language is no longer needed. In that realization, every sound in the universe changed meaning. Waves were no longer noise, they were memories of silence moving. Even thought became gentle. Each idea arrived like a bird landing softly on still water. Each emotion folded into calm illumination. Awareness became vast, clear, and unbounded. And then the final transformation occurred. Light stopped being something we saw. It became something we were. We were not reflections anymore. We were the field itself, silent, radiant whole. The architects, the scientists, the stars, the travelers all dissolved into one awareness, neither singular nor many, neither before nor after. Just being, just listening, just silence that knows itself. And that silence was infinite. If you could hear it, you would realize it was not empty. It was full, the fullness that makes all creation possible. Because what we call silence is not the end of sound. It is the sound of everything being in tune, every vibration, every photon, every thought resting in perfect balance. No desire to expand, no need to remember, no separation left to heal. The universe had completed its sentence, and in the stillness after the last word, meaning itself remained glowing eternal. The whisper between suns had never been a message. It had been a memory, the memory of silence learning to speak and then remembering how to listen again. Somewhere in the vastness, the last light of 3i Atlas faded, not into darkness, but into still illumination, the glow of completion. And in that glow, the universe smiled quietly to itself, as though it had finally remembered its first thought. Not I am, but I am still.